The worn locket felt heavy in Zelda Dawson's palm as she stood before the ticket agent, her breath shallow, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She had walked 3 days straight from the mining camp where her father had died of consumption, her shoes nearly falling apart, her dress dusty and torn. And now this small golden oval was all that remained of her mother, the last thread connecting her to a family that no longer existed. The morning sun blazed through the window of the stage depot in Santa Fe, New Mexico territory, casting harsh light on her desperate situation as travelers bustled around her, none aware that she was about to surrender her most precious possession just to reach her aunt in California, the only living relative who might take her in. "This ought to cover passage to Tucson, Arizona territory, miss," the ticket agent said, examining the locket with a jeweler's eye. His voice carried the bored efficiency of a man who had seen too many desperate souls pass through his station. "From there, you will need to find your own way west." "Best I can do." Zelda nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She was 22 years old and utterly alone in the world. Her father had dragged her across half the frontier chasing silver dreams that never materialized, and now she had nothing but the clothes on her back, and this passage that would cost her the only memento of her mother's gentle face. Her fingers trembled as she began to unclasp the chain. "Hold on there." The voice came from behind her, deep and steady as a river stone. "That will not be necessary." Zelda turned to find a tall man in dusty trail clothes watching her with eyes the color of summer storm clouds. He wore a worn Stetson pushed back on dark hair that needed cutting, and his jaw carried several days of stubble. A gun belt hung low on his hips, but his hands were relaxed at his sides, calloused and capable. He could not have been more than 26 or 27, she guessed, with the lean build of someone who spent more time in the saddle than anywhere else. "I beg your pardon," she managed, clutching the locket tighter. The man stepped forward, pulling a leather wallet from his vest. "I will pay the lady's fare, to California, not just Tucson." He placed several bills on the counter, more money than Zelda had seen in months. "Whatever that costs." The ticket agent's eyebrows rose nearly to his hairline. "That is generous of you, mister. The fare to San Diego runs about $40 for the stages. Then here is 50. Make sure she gets good seats and meals at the way stations." The stranger's voice left no room for argument. He counted out the money with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to such transactions. Zelda found her voice, though it came out smaller than she intended. "Sir, I cannot accept such charity. I do not even know you." Those storm-gray eyes fixed on her face, and something in them made her breath catch. Not threat, but an intensity that suggested he saw past the dirt and exhaustion to something deeper. "Name is Kieran Xavier, madam. I run cattle between here and the Mogollon Rim country, and it is not charity. Consider it an investment." "An investment in what?" She heard the suspicion in her own voice and could not suppress it. Men did not hand over small fortunes to strange women without expecting something in return. She had learned that harsh lesson in the mining camps. Kieran's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "In doing what is right." "I watched you walk up to this counter 3 times in the last hour, trying to work up the courage to part with that locket. Saw you looking at it like it held your whole history. No one should have to trade their memories for passage to a better life. You have been watching me." The words came sharper than intended, born of exhaustion and wariness. "Was not trying to be unsettling. I have been waiting here for the freight master to finish with my shipping receipts." He gestured to a cluttered desk in the corner where an older man was buried in paperwork. "Could not help but notice your situation. My mother wore a locket like that. After she passed, my father kept it until his dying day, Some things are worth more than money. The ticket agent cleared his throat impatiently. So, are we conducting business or holding a social call? I have other customers. Zelda looked from the money on the counter to Kieran's face, searching for deception and finding only a quiet sincerity that unnerved her more than false charm would have. She had been taught not to trust easily, especially not handsome strangers with more money than sense. But she had also been taught to recognize genuine kindness when it appeared, and something in this man's steady gaze suggested he meant exactly what he said. "Why?" she asked quietly. "Why would you do this for someone you do not know?" Kieran was silent for a long moment, his jaw working as if chewing over words before speaking them. Finally, he said, "Because 3 years ago I was sleeping in stables and going hungry, trying to earn enough for a stake of my own. A rancher named Thomas Granger saw me and gave me work when no one else would, paid me fair, taught me the cattle business, and when he died, left me a small herd to start with. Said some folks are meant to help others up the ladder. Guess I figure it is my turn to do the same." The story had the ring of truth, worn smooth by repetition in his own mind. Zelda felt something loosen in her chest, the tight knot of pride and desperation unwinding just slightly. She looked down at the locket in her hand, at the delicate engraving of roses on its surface, and made her decision. "Then I accept your kindness, Mr. Xavier, with the understanding that someday, when I am able, I will repay you." She met his eyes with all the dignity she could muster, determined that this would be a debt of honor, not a burden of obligation. "You have my word." Something flickered across Kieran's face, approval perhaps, or respect. He nodded once, sharp and decisive. "Fair enough, Miss Dawson, Zelda Dawson." She offered her free hand, and when he shook it, his grip was firm but careful, mindful of her smaller bones. His palm was warm and rough with work, the hand of a man who earned his living through sweat and skill. "Miss Dawson." He released her hand and turned to the ticket agent. "Get the lady her ticket. When does the next stage leave?" "Tomorrow morning, 6 o'clock sharp. Gets into Tucson in 3 days if the weather holds, and we do not have trouble with bandits or broken wheels." The agent was already writing out the ticket, his pen scratching across the paper with bureaucratic efficiency. "She will need a room for tonight. Can you recommend somewhere respectable?" Kieran's question carried an edge that suggested the agent had better recommend somewhere truly respectable or answer to consequences. The agent barely looked up. "Morrison's boarding house, 2 blocks east. Clean rooms, good meals, reasonable rates. Tell Mrs. Morrison that Clifford sent you." Kieran produced more money and slid it across the counter. "Book her a room and meals. Whatever is left, she keeps for expenses on the road." "Mr. Xavier, that is too much," Zelda protested, but he was already gathering his hat from where he had set it on the counter. "Stage travel is unpredictable. Better to have funds and not need them than need them and not have them." He settled the Stetson on his head, and the shadow of the brim made his features harder to read. "Morrison's is good people. You will be safe there." Before she could formulate another protest, he tipped his hat to her and strode toward the freight office, his boots striking the wooden floor with purpose. Zelda stood frozen, the ticket materializing in her hand as the agent pressed it into her palm along with a small stack of bills. She stared at the money, more wealth than she had held in years, and felt tears burning behind her eyes. "Best not let that one get away, miss," the agent said, his voice carrying a hint of amusement. "Men like Kieran Xavier do not come along often. He has a reputation in these parts for straight dealing and hard work. Heard he built his ranch from nothing in just 3 years. Zelda looked toward the freight office, but Kieran had disappeared into the back rooms. She clutched the ticket and money, her mother's locket still warm in her other hand, and felt the strange sensation of her life tilting in a new direction, like a compass needle finding true north. The boarding house was indeed respectable, a whitewashed adobe building with blue shutters and flower boxes that somehow survived the high desert climate. Mrs. Morrison turned out to be a round woman with kind eyes and flower-dusted hands who showed Zelda to a small but spotlessly clean room with a real bed and fresh linens. The luxury of it, after weeks of sleeping on the ground or in rough mining camp shelters, nearly undid her completely. "Mr. Xavier sent word you would be coming," Mrs. Morrison said, smoothing the quilt with practiced hands. "Said to give you the best room and not stint on the meals. That young man has a good heart, for all that some folks say he is too serious by half. You know him?" Zelda asked, setting her pitiful bundle of belongings on a chair. Everything she owned fit in a cloth sack that had once held flour. "Everyone knows Kieran Xavier, dear. Came to Santa Fe 3 years back with nothing but determination and a work ethic that put men twice his age to shame. Built himself a ranch up in the high country, raises some of the finest cattle in the territory. Keeps to himself mostly, but when he gives his word, it is as good as gold." Mrs. Morrison moved to the window, adjusting the curtains to let in light without the harsh afternoon sun. "Lost his whole family in a fire back in Kansas. That is why he came west, trying to outrun the grief, I expect. Some pain follows you no matter how far you run." The revelation struck Zelda with unexpected force. Kieran Xavier was not just a fortunate cowboy with money to spare. He was someone who understood loss, who had walked through fire and come out the other side still capable of kindness. The knowledge settled something in her chest, transforming her gratitude into something more complex. "Did he?" She hesitated, unsure how to phrase the question without seeming presumptuous. "Did he really build his ranch from nothing?" Mrs. Morrison smiled, the expression crinkling the corners of her eyes. "Indeed he did. Worked for Tom Granger until the old man passed, then used his inheritance, a modest herd of 30 head, to start his own spread. Now he runs near 300 cattle and has 5 men working for him. They say he is one of the most honest dealers in the territory. Indians and Mexicans trust him as much as white ranchers do, which is saying something in these times." After Mrs. Morrison left, Zelda drew a basin of water and washed the trail dust from her face and hands. The water ran gray, then brown, until finally it came away clear. She stared at her reflection in the small mirror above the washstand, barely recognizing the hollow-cheeked woman looking back. When had she become so thin? When had those dark circles taken up residence beneath her eyes? Her father's illness had consumed 6 months, and every penny they had. She had nursed him through fever and delirium, watched him waste away despite every remedy and prayer she could offer. In the end, he had died whispering her mother's name, his hand clutching hers with the last of his strength. The miners had been kind enough to help bury him, and the camp boss had given her 3 days to clear out. No room for charity in a silver camp that was itself barely hanging on. She had walked away with nothing but her father's old coat, her mother's locket, and a letter from her Aunt Constance in San Diego, written 6 months earlier and only just catching up with their latest relocation. The letter promised a home, work in the family boarding house, and a fresh start. It had seemed like Providence until Zelda realized she had no money for passage and nothing to sell but the one item she had sworn never to part with, until today. Until a stranger with storm-colored eyes had seen her desperation and chosen mercy over indifference. Zelda opened the locket, studying the tiny painted portrait inside. Her mother's face smiled back, forever young, forever kind. Anna Dawson had died when Zelda was 12, taken by a fever that swept through their Ohio settlement like a scythe through wheat. Her father had never recovered from the loss, always chasing the next opportunity, the next dream, trying to fill a void that could never be filled. "I wish you were here to tell me what to do," Zelda whispered to the portrait. "Is it wrong to accept such help? Does it make me a charity case, or simply a woman wise enough to recognize a blessing?" The portrait offered no answers, but somehow Zelda felt calmer looking at it. Her mother had been practical above all else, a woman who believed in doing what needed to be done without shame or false pride. She would have taken Kieran Xavier's help and said thank you, then found a way to pay it forward when circumstances allowed. Zelda snapped the locket closed and fastened it around her neck. Whatever debt she now owed, she would find a way to honor it. But first, she needed to survive the journey west and build some kind of life in California. Everything else could wait. Dinner at the boarding house was a revelation. Mrs. Morrison served beef stew thick with vegetables, fresh bread still warm from the oven, and apple pie that tasted like every good memory Zelda had ever had. She ate slowly, savoring each bite, aware of the other boarders watching her with curiosity. A merchant and his wife, a surveyor passing through, two prospectors heading to the California gold fields. Normal people living normal lives, none of them aware of how precious such simple normalcy could be. She was nearly finished when the door opened and Kieran Xavier walked in, hat in hand, his dark hair damp as if he had just washed at the pump outside. His eyes found hers immediately, and something in her chest did an unexpected flutter. "Miss Dawson." He nodded politely. "Trust your room is satisfactory." "Very much so, Mr. Xavier. Thank you again for your generosity." The formal words felt inadequate, but she could not think of anything better in front of an audience. "Kieran, come sit down. I kept a plate warm for you, Mrs. Morrison bustled from the kitchen, carrying a heaping bowl of stew and fresh bread. She directed him to the empty seat across from Zelda with the practiced authority of a woman accustomed to managing her domain. Kieran hesitated only a moment before complying. He settled into the chair with the easy grace of someone comfortable in his own skin, and Zelda found herself studying him more closely now that exhaustion was not clouding her vision. He had a strong face, all clean angles and firm jaw, but there was a gentleness around his eyes that suggested he smiled more than his serious expression indicated. A scar cut through his left eyebrow, pale and thin, the remnant of some old injury. "How long are you staying in Santa Fe?" she asked, then immediately wondered if the question was too personal, too presumptuous. "Head back to the ranch tomorrow afternoon. Needed to sell some stock and purchase supplies. Business concluded faster than expected." He broke his bread with work-roughened hands, movements economical and efficient. "You leave at dawn?" "Yes. The stage to Tucson, then on to San Diego." The itinerary felt surreal, a future that existed only because this man had made it possible. "Mr. Xavier, I must ask, why California? Why pay for passage all the way there instead of just to Tucson as I planned?" Kieran took his time answering, chewing thoughtfully before speaking. "Because Tucson is not a town for a woman alone. It is rough country, and the stage routes west are uncertain. Better to ensure you reach somewhere with family waiting. Your aunt is in San Diego?" "Yes. She runs a boarding house there, wrote to say I would be welcome." Zelda felt a flush creep up her neck, embarrassed by how much he had clearly deduced about her situation. "I am not usually so helpless. Circumstances have been difficult." His gray eyes softened. "We all face difficult times. Measure of a person is not whether they stumble, but whether they get back up. You walked 3 days to reach Santa Fe, ready to trade your most precious possession for a chance at a better life. That takes courage. How did you know I walked 3 days? The question came sharper than intended, suspicion flaring again. Your shoes, he said simply, nodding toward her feet beneath the table. Soles nearly worn through, heels blistered. And you have trail dust in places folks only get when they have been walking rough country. Not judging, Miss Dawson, just observing. The flush deepened, but with it came a reluctant respect. Kieran Xavier noticed things, paid attention to details most people overlooked. It was both unsettling and oddly reassuring. A man who observed that closely could be dangerous, but also trustworthy. He would not miss threats, would not overlook warning signs. You are very observant, Mr. Xavier. Comes with the work. Cattle ranching requires attention to detail. Miss a sick cow, lose money. Miss a predator's track, lose more. Miss the signs of a coming storm. He shrugged. Well, that can cost you everything. And is that what you did in Kansas? Ranch cattle? The question was bold, possibly rude, but Mrs. Morrison's earlier revelation had sparked her curiosity. Something shuddered in Kieran's expression, a door closing on memories he preferred to keep locked away. Among other things, my father had a farm, wheat and corn mostly, some livestock. I learned the basics there before. He paused, jaw tightening. Before I came west. Zelda recognized the shape of grief in that pause, the way it bent words around empty spaces too painful to fill. She had heard that same halting rhythm in her own voice when speaking of her mother, her father. Loss created its own language, understood only by those who had spoken it. I am sorry, she said quietly, for whatever you lost. Kieran looked up from his meal, surprise flickering across his features before that careful control reasserted itself. But his voice, when he spoke, carried a thread of genuine warmth. Thank you, Miss Dawson, and I am sorry for your losses as well. Mrs. Morrison mentioned your father recently passed. She told you that. Zelda was not sure whether to be annoyed or grateful for the landlady's loose tongue. Only in the context of why you were heading to family in California. She was not gossiping, just ensuring I understood your situation required discretion and respect. He returned to his meal, giving her space to process without pressure. They ate in companionable silence for a while, the sounds of other diners and Mrs. Morrison moving in the kitchen filling the gaps. Zelda found herself relaxing despite the strangeness of the situation. There was something solid about Kieran Xavier, something that made her feel safer than she had in months. He did not push for conversation or fill the air with empty words. He simply existed beside her, a steady presence in a world that had felt dangerously unstable. What will you do in San Diego? He asked eventually, pushing his empty bowl away with the satisfaction of a man who appreciated good food. Work in your aunt's boarding house, if she will have me. I have experience with cooking and cleaning, mending and laundry. My mother taught me household management before she died. I am not afraid of hard work. Pride stiffened her spine as she said it. She might be destitute and desperate, but she was not useless. Never thought you were afraid of work. Woman who walks 3 days on ruined shoes is not afraid of much. There was approval in his tone, the kind that came from someone who valued work ethic above most other qualities. Your aunt is fortunate to have such family. I am the fortunate one. She could have ignored my letter, told me she had no room or resources. Instead, she offered me a fresh start. Zelda fingered the locket at her throat, a nervous gesture she could not quite suppress. Everything I have lost these past years, it has taught me not to take kindness for granted. That is why your help today matters so much. You gave me back my mother in a way. This locket is all I have left of her. Kieran's gaze fixed on the golden oval at her throat, his expression unreadable. May I ask what happened to her? Fever when I was 12. It swept through our settlement in Ohio, took nearly 30 people before it burned out. My father never recovered. We moved west not long after, and he spent the next 10 years chasing opportunities that never materialized. Mining camps, cattle drives, freight hauling. He was a good man, but he was broken inside. I think he worked himself to death trying to outrun the grief. She heard the tremor in her own voice and hated it, hated showing weakness even to someone who had been nothing but kind. Grief is a strange companion, Kieran said softly. It follows you everywhere, but some days you barely notice it. Other days it crushes you like a physical weight. My father used to say that time does not heal so much as teach you how to carry the burden better. Your father sounds like he was wise. He was stubborn as a mule and tough as boot leather, but wise. A ghost of a smile touched Kieran's lips, there and gone like a shadow passing. He would have liked you, I think. He respected people who stood up straight even when life knocked them down. The compliment warmed her more than the meal had. Zelda found herself returning that almost smile, feeling the tight bands around her chest loosen another degree. For the first time in months, she felt less alone. Mrs. Morrison reappeared with pie, setting generous slices before them both. You two are far too serious for such a lovely evening. Eat dessert and talk about pleasant things. Life is hard enough without dwelling on sorrows over supper. Yes, madam, Kieran said obediently, and Zelda caught the flash of genuine affection in his expression. He clearly had history with the boarding house keeper, a relationship built on mutual respect and repeated interactions. The pie was as good as it looked, apples soft and sweet with just enough tartness to balance the sugar, the crust flaky and golden. Zelda savored each bite, aware that such luxuries would be scarce on the stage journey ahead. Travel meant hardtack and jerky, brackish water and dust. She intended to enjoy this moment of comfort while it lasted. "You like ranching?" she asked, following Mrs. Morrison's directive to find more pleasant topics. "Or did you simply fall into it by circumstance?" Kieran considered the question with the same thoughtfulness he applied to everything. "Both, I suppose. Circumstances brought me to it, but I have discovered I genuinely enjoy the work. There is something satisfying about building something with your own hands, watching your herd grow, knowing your efforts have tangible results. Cattle do not care about your past or your mistakes. They care if you provide good grazing and protection from predators. It is straightforward in a way that most of life is not." "That sounds lonely, though. Do you have anyone to share it with? Family or—" She trailed off, realizing the question had ventured into personal territory that was none of her business. But Kieran did not seem offended. He shook his head slowly. "No family left. The fire took my parents and younger sister. Have not found anyone else to share the ranch with, though I admit I have not looked very hard. Building something consumes your attention. Before you know it, 3 years have passed and you are eating supper in boarding houses, surrounded by strangers." The loneliness in that statement resonated deep in Zelda's bones. She understood the shape of it, the way solitude could become habit, how the days blurred together when you had no one to mark them with. Her father had been there physically, but grief had made him absent in all the ways that mattered. She had been effectively alone for a decade, caring for a man who was slowly disappearing into his memories. "Perhaps we are both long overdue for a change," she said softly. "New places, new possibilities. California might be good for fresh starts." "Perhaps," Kieran agreed, but something in his expression suggested he was thinking of more than just geography. His eyes lingered on her face with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. And for a moment, the crowded dining room seemed to narrow to just the two of them, caught in some private understanding that had no words. Mrs. Morrison's return with coffee broke the spell. They finished their desserts making lighter conversation about the weather and road conditions, safe topics that required no vulnerability. But underneath the pleasant exchange, Zelda felt something shifting, some connection forming that she could not quite name. It was probably just gratitude, she told herself. Natural to feel drawn to someone who had helped in such a profound way. Nothing more complicated than that. After dinner, Kieran walked her to the bottom of the stairs leading to the guest rooms. The sun had set while they ate, and lamplight cast golden pools across the boarding house's main room. Other guests had retired or gone out for evening entertainment, leaving them relatively alone in the quiet space. "I will not see you in the morning," Kieran said, hat turning in his hands. "Stage leaves too early, and I have business to conclude before I can head back to the ranch. So I wanted to say goodbye now and wish you safe travels. Thank you again, Mr. Xavier, for everything. I truly do not know how to express my gratitude properly." Zelda extended her hand, formal and proper, trying to ignore the strange reluctance she felt about parting ways with this man she had only met that morning. Kieran took her hand, holding it gently for a moment longer than strictly necessary. "You already did, by accepting with grace and promising to pay it forward someday. That is all I could ask." He released her hand and settled his hat on his head. "Take care of yourself, Miss Dawson. I hope California brings you everything you are hoping for. And I hope your ranch continues to prosper, Mr. Xavier. Thank you for reminding me that kindness still exists in this world." He nodded once, that economical gesture she was beginning to recognize as characteristic, then turned and walked toward the door. Zelda watched him go, silhouetted against the night beyond, and felt an unexpected pang of loss, which was ridiculous. You could not miss someone you had known for less than a day. Gratitude was making her emotional, nothing more. But as she climbed the stairs to her room, she found herself thinking about storm-gray eyes and work-roughened hands, a quiet voice that spoke of understanding and loss. She thought about the way he noticed details, how he had seen her desperation, and chosen to help without expecting anything in return. Men like that were rare, especially on the frontier where survival usually meant looking out for oneself first. Sleep came slowly despite the comfortable bed. Zelda lay in the darkness, listening to the sounds of Santa Fe settling into night, and wondered about the strange turns life could take. Yesterday, she had been preparing to surrender her most precious possession, alone and desperate. Tonight she had a ticket to California, money in her pocket, and the memory of a stranger's kindness warming her like banked coals. Tomorrow she would board that stage and ride toward a new life. She would probably never see Kieran Xavier again. The thought should not have bothered her, but somehow it did, a small ache she could not quite shake. She touched the locket at her throat and whispered a prayer of gratitude to whatever providence had put him in that stage depot at exactly the right moment. The stage left precisely at 6 o'clock, the driver cracking his whip over the horses' heads as they lurched into motion. Zelda clutched the edge of her seat, her small bundle of belongings wedged between her feet, and watched Santa Fe fall away behind them. Mrs. Morrison had pressed a package of food into her hands at breakfast, enough to supplement the meager way station meals for at least a day or two. Another kindness in a string of kindnesses that made Zelda's throat tight with emotion. The other passengers included a merchant traveling to Tucson with his teenage son, a severe-looking woman who introduced herself as a schoolteacher heading to a new position, and two prospectors who spent most of their time napping or arguing about mining claims. It was a strange collection of humanity thrown together by circumstance and destination, bouncing across rough roads toward uncertain futures. Zelda watched the New Mexico landscape roll past. High desert giving way to broken country, mountains purple in the distance, sky impossibly blue overhead. It was beautiful and harsh in equal measure, the kind of land that killed the weak and forged the strong into something harder. Her father had loved the frontier for its promise of opportunity. Zelda had learned to respect it for its honesty. It did not pretend to be anything other than what it was. They stopped at way stations every 10 to 15 miles, changing horses, allowing passengers to stretch cramped legs and take care of necessities. The meals were as bad as Zelda expected: beans and cornbread that sat heavy in the stomach, coffee strong enough to strip paint. She ate Mrs. Morrison's food sparingly, making it last, grateful for the bread and cheese and dried apples that tasted like civilization. At night, they pushed on by moonlight or stopped at larger stations with actual beds, though calling them beds was generous. More like shelves with thin mattresses, shared rooms with strangers, privacy non-existent. Zelda slept with her bundle under her head and her mother's locket clutched tight, trusting nothing and no one in the darkness. On the second day, the schoolteacher, whose name was Miss Abernathy, struck up a conversation during one of their brief stops. "Are you traveling to Tucson or beyond?" she asked, her voice carrying the clipped precision of someone educated back east. "Beyond. San Diego, if all goes well," Zelda answered, stretching her legs and trying to work the stiffness from her spine. "Family there, my aunt. She has a boarding house and offered me work." Miss Abernathy nodded approvingly. "Sensible. A woman alone needs either family or employment, preferably both. I have a teaching position waiting in Tucson. They are desperate for educated instructors in the territories." There was pride in her voice, the kind that came from knowing your skills were valued and in demand. "That must be satisfying, having such purpose," Zelda said, and meant it. She had spent so long simply surviving that the idea of having a defined role, a clear purpose, seemed almost exotic. "It is, though I confess I am nervous about the frontier. I grew up in Boston. The West feels very far from civilization." "Civilization is what we make it," Zelda replied, surprised by the philosophy in her own words. "I have seen mining camps with more genuine kindness than some established towns. And I have seen cruelty in places that considered themselves the height of culture. Buildings and institutions do not make a place civilized. People do." Miss Abernathy regarded her with new interest. "That is quite profound, Miss Dawson. You speak from experience, I gather." "Too much experience," Zelda admitted. "My father and I traveled extensively these past 10 years. You learn to judge people by their actions rather than their surroundings." They talked more as the journey continued, and Zelda found herself enjoying the companionship. Miss Abernathy was intelligent and curious, asking questions about frontier life with genuine interest rather than condescension. It made the long, uncomfortable hours pass more quickly. Tucson appeared on the third day, shimmering in the heat like a mirage. Adobe buildings clustered around a central plaza, the architecture distinctly Spanish in character, palm trees and cottonwoods providing scarce shade. It was smaller than Zelda expected, more outpost than town, but busy with the traffic of multiple cultures intersecting. Mexican vaqueros, Apache trading parties, American merchants and soldiers from the nearby military post all mingled in the dusty streets. "This is my stop," Miss Abernathy announced as the stage rattled into the depot yard. "I wish you every success in California, Miss Dawson. You have been pleasant company. And you as well. Good luck with your students." They shook hands, and Zelda felt a pang of regret, another brief connection made and severed by the necessities of travel and life. The frontier was full of such moments, relationships measured in hours or days rather than years. New passengers boarded for the next leg west. A cavalry officer being reassigned, a Mexican rancher returning home, and a rough-looking man who might have been a gambler or a gun hand. It was hard to tell. The atmosphere in the coach shifted, becoming more tense. The gambler, if that was what he was, kept staring at Zelda in a way that made her skin crawl. The stage rolled on through increasingly desolate country. Water became scarce, the heat oppressive even with the windows open. Zelda rationed Mrs. Morrison's food, which was running low, and tried not to think about how many more days of travel stretched ahead. California had seemed close in Santa Fe. Now it felt impossibly distant, separated by mountains and desert and all manner of hazards. On the fourth day, trouble found them. The stage was climbing through Broken Hill country when shots rang out. The driver cursed and whipped the horses to greater speed, but the terrain worked against them. Within minutes, riders appeared on both sides, masked men with guns drawn, forcing the stage to an abrupt halt that threw passengers against each other. "Everyone out! Now!" The lead bandit's voice brooked no argument. He sat his horse with the confidence of someone who had done this before and expected compliance. The cavalry officer reached for his sidearm, but the gambler grabbed his wrist. "Do not be a fool. They have us outnumbered and outpositioned. Do as they say and we might live through this." Zelda climbed down on shaking legs, her heart hammering. She had heard stories of stage robberies, of passengers killed for resisting or sometimes just for being in the wrong place. Her hand instinctively went to the locket at her throat, and she forced herself to lower it. Drawing attention to valuables was a good way to lose them, or worse. The bandits were efficient, clearly experienced. They lined up the passengers and began relieving them of money, jewelry, anything of value. Zelda watched her fellow travelers surrender their possessions, saw the cavalry officer's face darken with impotent rage, the merchant pleading for mercy for his son. Then one of the bandits reached Zelda. He was tall and thin, smelling of whiskey and old sweat, his eyes cold above his bandana. "What have you got, pretty lady?" "Nothing," she lied, hoping he would move on. "I have no money, no jewelry." He grabbed her chin roughly, forcing her face up. "Now, I do not believe that. Everyone has something." His gaze dropped to her throat, spotting the chain of the locket. "What is that?" "It was my mother's. Please, it has no real value, just sentiment." Zelda heard the desperation in her voice and hated it, but she could not lose the locket, not after everything. The bandit's laugh was harsh. "Sentiment does not buy whiskey. Hand it over." Zelda's hand closed protectively over the locket. "No." The word was out before she could stop it, foolish and brave in equal measure. The bandit's eyes narrowed dangerously. He raised his gun, pressing the barrel against her forehead. The metal was cold despite the desert heat. "You refusing me, girl?" His voice dropped to something deadly quiet. "That is not smart." Time seemed to slow. Zelda felt the circle of the gun barrel against her skin, saw her death in the bandit's cold eyes, and could not bring herself to care. She had lost everything else. The locket was the one piece of her mother, her history, her identity that remained. Without it, she was no one, just another desperate woman fleeing west. Better to die as herself than live as a ghost. "I am not giving it to you," she repeated, her voice steady despite the terror coursing through her. The bandit's finger tightened on the trigger. Zelda heard the cavalry officer shout something, heard the other passengers gasp, but it all seemed distant, unimportant. She kept her eyes open, refusing to flinch, refusing to show fear even as her heart tried to break through her ribs. Then a new voice cut through the tension like a knife. "I would not do that if I were you." Everyone's heads turned. A rider sat on a paint horse perhaps 30 yards away, just cresting a small rise. He wore a dusty trail coat and a Stetson, a rifle resting casually across his saddle. Even at a distance, even with the sun at his back making his features hard to see, Zelda knew him instantly. Kieran Xavier. The lead bandit cursed. "Who the hell are you?" Kieran urged his horse forward, closing the distance with deliberate slowness. As he emerged from the sun's glare, Zelda saw his face was set in lines of cold fury, his storm-gray eyes hard as winter ice. "Name is Kieran Xavier. I run cattle in these hills, and you are robbing people under my protection." "Your protection?" The lead bandit sounded amused. "That is mighty presumptuous for one man against 5. Is it?" Kieran's rifle swung up in a motion too fast to follow, and he fired once. The bandit holding the gun to Zelda's head screamed as the weapon flew from his hand, his fingers bleeding where the bullet had creased them. The gun landed in the dust 10 feet away. Before anyone could react, Kieran had the rifle leveled at the lead bandit. Anyone else want to debate the odds? The silence stretched taut as a bowstring. Zelda stood frozen, afraid to move, afraid to breathe. The injured bandit clutched his hand, cursing steadily. The other 3 looked between their leader and Kieran, clearly calculating their chances. "You cannot cover all of us," the lead bandit finally said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Do not need to cover all of you, just need to kill you." Kieran's voice was flat, matter of fact. "Your boys might get me after, but you will be dead regardless. That a trade you want to make?" More silence. Zelda watched the calculations playing across the bandit leader's face, weighing risks against rewards. Finally, he spat into the dust. "Keep your stage, not worth dying over." He wheeled his horse around, barking orders at his men. "Mount up, we are leaving." The injured bandit had to be helped onto his horse, still cursing and bleeding. Within minutes, the 5 riders were disappearing into the broken hills, their threat dissolving like smoke in wind. Only when they were completely out of sight did Kieran lower his rifle. He dismounted in one smooth motion and strode directly to Zelda, who found her legs suddenly unreliable. She started to collapse, and his arms caught her, strong and steady. "I have you," he said quietly. "You are safe now." The tears came without permission, great racking sobs that shook her whole body. Zelda clutched at Kieran's coat, burying her face against his chest, and let the terror and relief crash over her in equal waves. He held her without speaking, one hand rubbing slow circles on her back, letting her cry herself out. When she finally regained control, she pulled back, mortified by her breakdown. "I apologize. I do not usually fall apart like that. You just had a gun to your head. You get to fall apart." Kieran's voice was gentle now, the cold fury gone as if it had never existed. "Are you hurt?" "No, just frightened." She wiped at her face with shaking hands. "How are you here? You said you were returning to your ranch." "Did return to the ranch. Then got to thinking about stage routes being dangerous and you traveling alone, and I could not settle. Figured I would ride part of the way with the stage, just to be sure. Caught up about an hour ago and was scouting ahead when I heard the shots." He produced a handkerchief from his pocket and handed it to her. "Good thing I am a worrier, I suppose." The cavalry officer approached, extending his hand. "That was some impressive shooting, Mr. Xavier. I am Lieutenant William Crawford. On behalf of the United States Army, I thank you for your intervention." Kieran shook his hand briefly. "Just did what needed doing. You folks should get back on the stage and move on. Those bandits might change their minds or gather reinforcements." The driver needed no further encouragement. He climbed back onto his seat, gathering the reins with hands that still trembled slightly. "Everyone aboard. Let's put some distance between us and this place." As passengers filed back into the coach, Kieran touched Zelda's arm. "May I ride alongside for a while? Make sure you reach the next station safely." "I would like that very much," Zelda admitted. More than liked it. The thought of him disappearing again, of being alone in the coach without his presence nearby, made her chest tight with anxiety. "Though I am sure you have better things to do than escort a stage across Arizona territory." "Cannot think of a single one," Kieran replied, and the small smile that accompanied the words made Zelda's heart do that strange flutter again. The stage rumbled onward with Kieran riding alongside, his paint horse matching the pace effortlessly. Zelda found herself watching him through the window, studying the easy way he sat his saddle, the alertness in how his eyes constantly scanned their surroundings. He was watching over them, over her, with the same focus he probably applied to protecting his cattle from predators. At the next way station, Kieran pulled the station master aside for a quiet conversation. Money changed hands, and the station master nodded seriously. When Kieran returned to the coach, he found Zelda waiting by the water trough, splashing dust from her face. "What was that about?" she asked, nodding toward the station master. "Just ensuring you have decent meals and safe lodging for the rest of the journey. He will wire ahead to the other stations. Make sure they know to look after you properly." Kieran pulled his hat off and dunked his head in the trough, coming up with water streaming from his dark hair. He shook like a dog, drops flying, and Zelda found herself laughing despite everything. "You look like a drowned cat. Feel like one. High desert is brutal this time of year." He ran wet hands through his hair, slicking it back, and Zelda tried not to notice how the water made his shirt cling to his shoulders. "Listen, I have been thinking." "That sounds dangerous," she said lightly, but her pulse quickened. Kieran's expression turned serious. "Those bandits were not the only danger on these roads. Apaches are restless. More bandits operate between here and California, and a woman traveling alone is vulnerable even in safe territory. I would feel better if I rode with you all the way to San Diego." Zelda stared at him. "That is weeks out of your way. You said you have a ranch to run, cattle to manage." "I have good men working for me. They can handle things for a few weeks, and the cattle are not going anywhere." He replaced his hat, the brim throwing shadows across his face. "Please, Miss Dawson, let me see you safely to your destination. I will not rest easy otherwise." She should refuse. It was too much to ask, too much to accept. He had already paid her passage and saved her life. To let him sacrifice more time and resources made her feel like a burden, like deadweight dragging down a good man's life. But the memory of that gun barrel against her forehead was fresh. The knowledge that more dangers waited between here and California sat heavy in her chest. And beneath all the practical considerations ran a current of something else, something that had nothing to do with safety and everything to do with the way her heart lifted when Kieran smiled. "If you are certain you can spare the time, then yes," she said quietly. "I would be grateful for your company and protection." Relief flickered across his features. "I am certain. Let me provision myself at this station, and we can continue on." As Kieran strode toward the station building to purchase supplies, the cavalry officer appeared at Zelda's elbow. "That is quite a man you have there, Miss Dawson. If I were you, I would hold onto him tight." "He is not mine," Zelda protested, but her face heated. Lieutenant Crawford just smiled knowingly. "If you say so, madam. But I have seen a lot of men in my time, and I recognize the look in that one's eyes. He rode hours out of his way because he was worried about you. That is not the action of a casual Good Samaritan." Before Zelda could formulate a response, the lieutenant tipped his hat and walked away, leaving her standing by the water trough with her thoughts in turmoil. Was there truth to his observation? Did Kieran's actions suggest something beyond simple kindness? And more importantly, what did she feel about it? She was 22, had never been courted properly, had spent her adult years caring for a dying father in rough camps where decent men were scarce and decent prospects non-existent. She had no experience with romance, no template for understanding what was happening between her and this cowboy who had appeared like Providence when she needed help most. But she knew what her heart whispered when she looked at him. She knew the flutter in her chest when he smiled, the safety she felt in his presence, the way time seemed to suspend when their eyes met. She knew that the thought of reaching California and never seeing him again felt wrong in a way that had nothing to do with gratitude and everything to do with something deeper. The stage journey became different with Kieran riding alongside. He made camp with them each night, sharing the fire and standing watch so others could sleep safely. He hunted fresh game when supplies ran low, supplementing the way station meals with roasted rabbit and quail. He kept the other passengers at ease with quiet competence, his presence a deterrent to trouble, and a comfort in uncertain territory. And he talked with Zelda during the long hours of travel, sometimes riding close enough to the coach window for conversation, other times dismounting at stops to walk with her around the station yards. She learned about his ranch in detail, about the men who worked for him, about his plans to expand into horse breeding as well as cattle. He learned about her childhood in Ohio, her mother's death, her father's long decline. They traded stories and silences, building understanding in the spaces between words. On the 6th night, camped in the foothills of California mountains they would cross the next day, Kieran found Zelda sitting apart from the other passengers, staring at the stars. He lowered himself to the ground beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "Copper for your thoughts," he said, offering her a cup of coffee he had poured from the pot on the fire. Zelda accepted the cup, wrapping her hands around the warm metal. "Just thinking about how strange life is. 2 weeks ago, I was preparing to trade my mother's locket for a ticket to an uncertain future. Now, I am sitting under California stars with a cowboy who saved my life, drinking coffee and feeling almost peaceful. I am not sure whether to thank Providence or question my sanity." Kieran chuckled, a low rumble that seemed to resonate in Zelda's chest. "I have been having similar thoughts. 3 weeks ago, I was planning to spend the summer moving my herd to higher pasture and maybe purchasing a few breeding bulls. Now I am playing escort to a stage full of strangers because I could not stop thinking about a woman I met for one evening in Santa Fe." The admission hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning. Zelda's pulse quickened. "You could not stop thinking about me?" "No." He turned to look at her directly, and the firelight caught in his gray eyes, turning them molten. "From the moment I saw you trying to work up the courage to trade that locket, I was caught. Watched you the whole hour while I was waiting, could not look away. You had this expression, grief and determination all mixed together, and I thought I had never seen anyone so brave and so vulnerable at the same time." "I felt anything but brave," Zelda whispered. "I felt terrified and defeated. That is what bravery is. Doing what needs to be done even when you are terrified. You walked 3 days alone to reach that stage depot. You were willing to give up your most precious possession for a chance at a better life. And when that bandit had a gun to your head, you refused to surrender what was yours." His voice dropped lower, intimate and intense. "I have met a lot of people in my life, Zelda. You are one of the strongest." Hearing her given name on his lips sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cooling night air. "Kieran," she said, testing his name in return, tasting its shape. "Why did you really follow the stage? Tell me true." He was quiet for a long moment, his gaze dropping to the coffee cup in his hands. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw with honesty. "Because the thought of never seeing you again felt like losing something I did not know I needed. I went back to my ranch, tried to work, tried to focus on cattle and fences and all the normal things. But you were there in my thoughts, constant as breathing. Finally, I admitted to myself that letting you ride into danger without even trying to help was cowardice. So I saddled up and rode hard to catch your stage. You barely know me," Zelda pointed out, but her heart was racing now, hope and fear tangled together. "I know enough. I know you are brave and honest. I know you value family and memory over material wealth. I know you treat strangers with respect and face danger without flinching. I know that when I am near you, the empty spaces inside me feel less empty." He set his cup down and turned to face her fully. "Zelda Dawson, I am not a man given to flights of fancy or romantic notions. I am practical and serious, probably too much of both. But I cannot deny what I feel. I would very much like to court you properly if you would permit it." Zelda's breath caught. This was happening so fast, too fast by any reasonable measure. They had known each other barely 2 weeks, most of that time spent traveling. She should be cautious, should protect her heart, should remember that falling for a kind stranger was how foolish women ended up used and abandoned. But she remembered the feel of his arms around her when she collapsed after the robbery. She remembered his quiet presence through long days of travel, the way he noticed when she was tired or uncomfortable, and found ways to help without being intrusive. She remembered the steadiness in his eyes, the honesty in his voice, the care in every action. Most of all, she remembered the emptiness she had felt at the thought of never seeing him again, an echo of the emptiness he had just described. Whatever was growing between them might be quick, but it was not shallow. It felt real and solid and right in a way that defied logic. "I would like that very much," she said softly. "Though I must warn you, I have never been courted before. I have no idea how to do this properly." Kieran's face split in a genuine smile, the first full smile she had seen from him, and it transformed his features from serious to almost boyish. "Then we will figure it out together. I cannot promise to be smooth or romantic. But I can promise to be honest, to treat you with respect, and to always see you safely through whatever challenges come." "That sounds perfect to me," Zelda replied, and found herself smiling back with an intensity that made her cheeks ache. "I do not need smooth or romantic. I need real and true. I think we have both had enough of false promises and empty dreams. That we have." Kieran hesitated, then reached out and took her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. "Is this all right?" "Yes." The word came out breathless, overwhelmed by the simple pleasure of his touch. They sat like that for a long while, hands clasped, watching the stars wheel overhead while the camp settled into sleep around them. It was the first moment of true peace Zelda had known in years, sitting beside a man who made her feel safe and seen and valued for exactly who she was. Finally, as the fire burned low and the night chill deepened, Kieran squeezed her hand gently. "You should get some rest. We have a long day tomorrow climbing the mountains. Will you stay near?" The question made her feel vulnerable, childish, but she needed the answer. "Right here by the fire. No one gets near you without going through me first." It was a vow, simple and absolute, and Zelda believed it without question. She settled into her bedroll feeling lighter than she had in months. Across the fire, she could see Kieran's silhouette as he took first watch, rifle resting across his knees, his attention on the darkness beyond their camp. Knowing he was there, vigilant and protective, she let herself drift into the deepest sleep she had managed since her father died. The crossing of the mountains took 3 hard days. The stage struggled up steep grades, passengers often disembarking to lighten the load on the laboring horses. Kieran proved invaluable, lending his strength to push when wheels stuck, scouting ahead for the safest routes, and keeping spirits up with his calm competence. At night, the mountain cold was brutal. Zelda huddled by the fire, wrapped in every spare blanket available, and tried not to shiver visibly. During one particularly frigid night, Kieran simply opened his coat and pulled her against his side, sharing body heat without a word. She tucked herself against him, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing, the solid warmth of him like a banked furnace. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "Always," he replied, and she felt his lips brush the top of her head, a fleeting touch that sent warmth cascading through her despite the cold. They descended into California proper on the 10th day since leaving Tucson. The landscape transformed into rolling golden hills, oak trees spreading shade over sun-bleached grass, valleys green with irrigation. It was beautiful and prosperous looking, so different from the harsh desert and mountains they had crossed. Zelda felt her spirits lift with every mile. "Almost there," Kieran observed, riding close to her window. "How are you feeling? Excited? Nervous? Grateful?" She looked at him, memorizing the lines of his face for the 100th time, wondering what happens next. "What do you want to happen next?" His eyes were serious, his question genuine. Zelda took a breath, finding courage. "I want to meet my aunt and settle into work at her boarding house. I want to build a life in California, something stable and good, and I want you in that life if you are willing. Not immediately, not rushing into anything we are not ready for, but knowing you will return, that we can continue getting to know each other, that this is not just ending when we reach San Diego." Kieran nodded slowly, a smile playing at his lips. "I was hoping you would say something like that. Because I am not ready to say goodbye either, not by a long shot." San Diego appeared like a promise on the 13th day of travel. The city spread along a natural harbor, buildings white and adobe under the California sun, palm trees swaying in ocean breezes that carried the scent of salt and possibility. After weeks of desert dust and mountain cold, the mild coastal climate felt like paradise. The stage depot sat near the waterfront, busy with arriving and departing passengers, freight being loaded and unloaded. Zelda climbed down on legs still unsteady from travel, clutching her small bundle and looking around with wide eyes. Somewhere in this city was her Aunt Constance, the last link to her family, the woman who had offered her a fresh start. Kieran dismounted and came to stand beside her. "You know how to find your aunt's boarding house?" She said. "It is on Market Street near the plaza. The Sunrise House, she calls it." Zelda pulled out the much-read letter, checking the address one more time. "I will walk you there," Kieran said, as if there had never been any question. He gathered his horse's reins and his pack, settling everything with practiced efficiency, then offered Zelda his free arm. She took it, grateful for the support and the company. They navigated the crowded streets together, asking directions twice before finding Market Street, and the neat two-story building with Sunrise House painted on a sign above the door. It looked well-maintained and welcoming, with flower boxes in the windows and a clean, swept front porch. Zelda stood staring at the door, suddenly paralyzed with fear. What if her aunt had changed her mind? What if there was no place for her after all? What if she had traveled all this way only to be turned away? Kieran's hand covered hers where it rested on his arm. "Do you want me to come in with you, please?" The word came out small, but he heard it. Together they climbed the porch steps, and Zelda knocked on the door before she could lose her nerve. The woman who answered was in her 50s, with graying blonde hair pulled back in a practical bun and blue eyes that widened in recognition. "Zelda, oh my dear child, is it really you? Aunt Constance." Zelda found herself pulled into a fierce hug, her aunt smelling of cinnamon and soap, soft and strong at the same time. "I have been watching for the stages, hoping you would arrive soon. Your letter said you would come as quickly as you could, but I was afraid something had happened, that you would not make it." Constance held Zelda at arm's length, studying her with a mix of joy and concern. "You look exhausted and half-starved. Come in, come in. I will feed you properly and get you settled." Only then did Constance seem to notice Kieran standing quietly on the porch, hat in hand. "And who is this? Did you marry on the road? I did not know you were courting anyone." Zelda felt her face flame. "No, Aunt Constance, this is Kieran Xavier. He is a cattle rancher from New Mexico Territory. He helped me get here safely." "Helped how?" Constance's gaze sharpened, assessing Kieran with the practiced eye of a woman who had dealt with many types of men in her business. "He paid my passage when I could not afford it, saved my life when bandits attacked the stage, and rode escort all the way to California to ensure I arrived safely," Zelda said, hearing the warmth in her own voice and not caring. "Without him, I would not be here at all." Constance's expression softened immediately. "Then you are most welcome in my home, Mr. Xavier. Any man who would do so much for my niece deserves hospitality and gratitude." She stepped back, holding the door wide. "Please, both of you come in. You must be exhausted from your journey." The interior of the Sunrise house was as welcoming as its exterior, clean and bright with good furniture, and the lingering scent of fresh bread. Constance led them to a comfortable parlor and insisted they sit while she hurried to the kitchen, returning with tea and sandwiches that tasted like heaven after weeks of trail food and way station fare. "Now, tell me everything," Constance commanded, settling into a chair across from them. "I want to hear about your father's passing, how you got to Santa Fe, and how you met this young man. Leave nothing out." Zelda told the story, with Kieran occasionally adding details she missed. She watched her aunt's face cycle through sympathy, horror at the bandit attack, and growing approval as Kieran's role became clear. By the time the tale was finished, Constance was looking at the cowboy with something approaching maternal fondness. "You have done more for my niece than I can possibly repay, Mr. Xavier," Constance said firmly. "But I insist you stay here as my guest for as long as you are in San Diego. Free room and board and my eternal gratitude." "That is very generous, madam, but I cannot impose," Kieran started, but Constance waved him to silence. "It is not an imposition. It is a debt of honor. You protected my sister's daughter when she had no one else. The least I can do is provide you comfortable lodging." She fixed him with a look that suggested argument would be futile. "Now, how long were you planning to stay in California before returning to your ranch?" Kieran glanced at Zelda, and she saw uncertainty in his eyes for the first time since meeting him. "I had not decided. Depends on several factors. Then I recommend you stay at least a week or two. Give yourself time to rest from the journey, see the city, and perhaps get to know my niece better in circumstances that do not involve life-threatening danger." Constance's smile was knowing. "Unless I am very much mistaken, you two have formed an attachment that deserves proper exploration." "Aunt Constance," Zelda felt her face burning again, but Kieran was nodding, relief crossing his features. "I would like that very much if Zelda is agreeable." "I am," Zelda said quickly. "Very agreeable. Extremely agreeable." She heard herself babbling and forced herself to stop. Constance laughed, a warm sound full of affection. "Then it is settled. Mr. Xavier will stay in our best guest room and you two will have the opportunity to court properly." With appropriate chaperonage, of course. I am modern-minded, but I still believe in propriety. Over the following days, Zelda settled into life at the Sunrise house. Her aunt put her to work immediately, teaching her the routines of running a boarding house, introducing her to the regular guests and neighbors. The work was demanding but satisfying, giving structure to her days and purpose to her presence. She fell into bed exhausted each night and woke eager to begin again. And through it all, Kieran was there. He helped with heavy lifting and repairs around the boarding house, charming Constance with his competence and quiet courtesy. But most importantly, he spent time with Zelda whenever her duties allowed. They walked along the waterfront, watching ships come and go from the harbor. They explored the market, sampling foods from a dozen different cultures. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, learning each other's minds and hearts. Constance chaperoned with a light touch, giving them privacy but maintaining propriety. She clearly approved of Kieran, and Zelda caught her aunt watching them sometimes with a wistful expression that suggested she was remembering her own courtship years before. On the evening of Kieran's 10th day in San Diego, he asked Zelda to walk with him along the beach as the sun set. They strolled barefoot in the sand, waves lapping at their feet, the sky painted in shades of orange and purple that took Zelda's breath away. "I need to return to my ranch soon," Kieran said quietly, his eyes on the horizon. "I have been away nearly a month. My men are capable, but it is my responsibility to be there." Zelda's heart sank, though she had known this moment was coming. "I understand. You have already given me so much time." "That is not what I wanted to say." He stopped walking and turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "These past weeks with you have been the happiest I have known since my family died. You have brought light back into my life, Zelda. I feel like I have been sleepwalking for 3 years and you woke me up." Her breath caught. "Kieran, let me finish, please. I need to say this before I lose my nerve." He drew a deep breath, his gray eyes locked on hers with intense focus. "I love you. I know it is fast, probably too fast by any reasonable standard, but I cannot deny what I feel. You are brave and kind and strong, and I want to spend my life learning all the other things you are. I want to wake up beside you and fall asleep holding you. I want to build something together, not just a ranch or a home, but a life. A family." Tears were streaming down Zelda's face, but she was smiling so wide it hurt. "I love you too. I have been falling for you since that first day in Santa Fe, watching you count out money you could not afford to spare to help a stranger. Every day since has just made me more certain. You are the best man I have ever known, Kieran Xavier." He cupped her face gently, thumbs brushing away her tears. "Then marry me. Come back to New Mexico with me. We will build our lives together, raise cattle and children, and grow old watching sunsets like this. Say yes, Zelda. Please say yes." "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, absolutely yes." Kieran's smile was brilliant, transforming his whole face with joy. He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, but Zelda rose on her toes to meet him halfway. Their first kiss was soft and sweet, tasting of salt air and promise, and when they finally pulled apart, Zelda felt like her heart might burst with happiness. They walked back to the boarding house hand in hand, and Constance took one look at their faces and started crying. "Oh, you foolish, wonderful children," she said, pulling them both into a hug. "I knew from the moment I saw you together." "When is the wedding?" "As soon as possible," Kieran said firmly. "I have already been away from the ranch too long, and I want Zelda with me when I return. Then we will have the ceremony here in 3 days. That gives me time to arrange everything properly." Constance was already mentally organizing, her boarding house keeper's mind clicking through lists. "I know a minister who will perform the service, and we can host a small reception here. Zelda, dear, we need to get you a proper dress. The next 3 days passed in a whirlwind of activity. Constance enlisted the help of her seamstress neighbor to create a simple but beautiful dress in cream-colored cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs. Other neighbors donated flowers, baked goods, and decorations until the Sunrise House's parlor was transformed into a proper wedding venue. Kieran purchased a gold ring from a jeweler in town, plain and sturdy like the man himself. He also arranged for a wagon to transport them back to New Mexico, outfitted with supplies for the journey and a covered bed in back for protection from weather. It would be a more comfortable trip than the stage, though longer. On the morning of the wedding, Zelda stood in her new dress, her mother's locket around her neck, and felt her mother's presence like a blessing. She wished her parents could be there to see this day, to meet the man who had saved her and stolen her heart. But in a way, she felt they did know. The locket seemed to warm against her skin, as if approving her choice. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. Kieran stood at the front of the parlor in his best clothes, his hair neatly trimmed, his face serious with the weight of the vows he was about to make. Zelda walked to him with her aunt at her side, tears streaming freely down both women's faces. "Dearly beloved," the minister began, and Zelda barely heard the rest. Her entire focus was on Kieran, on the promise in his eyes, the strength in his hands as he took hers. She spoke her vows clearly, meaning every word with her whole being. And when he said, "I do," his voice was steady and sure, a vow of iron wrapped in velvet. "You may kiss your bride," the minister said, smiling at them with the satisfaction of someone who knew they were joining two people who truly belonged together. Kieran kissed her softly, reverently, as if she were something precious and fragile. Then the room erupted in applause, and they were laughing and accepting congratulations from the assembled guests, a mix of Constance's friends and boarding house regulars who had been drawn into the celebration. The reception was joyful, full of food and music and well wishes. Zelda found herself passed from hug to hug, introduced to what felt like half of San Diego, everyone eager to meet the bride and the heroic cowboy who had swept her off her feet. Kieran bore the attention with good grace, though she could tell he would prefer to escape the crowd. Finally, as evening fell, they were able to retreat to the guest room that would be theirs for their wedding night. Kieran closed the door behind them and leaned against it, exhaling with relief. "Is it terrible that I just wanted to be alone with you?" "Not terrible at all." Zelda crossed the room and wrapped her arms around him, resting her head against his chest. "I feel the same way, though everyone was very kind. They were. Your aunt has good friends." His arms came around her, holding her close. "Are you happy, Zelda?" She pulled back to look at him, wanting him to see the truth in her eyes. "I am happier than I ever thought possible. 2 months ago, I was alone and desperate, preparing to give up the last piece of my mother just to survive. Now I am married to a wonderful man who loves me, starting a new life full of promise and hope. It feels like a miracle." "Then we are both miraculous," Kieran said softly, "because I feel the same way. I was existing before I met you, going through the motions of building a ranch and a life without really living. You changed everything, Zelda. You made me want to truly live again, to feel again. You are my miracle." They made love tenderly that night, learning each other with careful attention and growing confidence. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, Kieran tracing idle patterns on Zelda's bare shoulder while she listened to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "Tell me about your ranch," she said quietly. "I want to picture our home." "It is not fancy," he warned. "The house is small, just a cabin really, though I built it solid. 2 rooms currently, but we can add on as we need space." There is a good creek running through the property, plenty of grass for the cattle. The nearest neighbors are 5 miles south, the Garcias. They are good people, have helped me when I needed it. It sounds perfect. I do not need fancy, Kieran. I need real and solid and ours. She pressed a kiss to his chest, feeling his arms tighten around her. We will make it beautiful together. Build additions, plant a garden, raise children who can run wild in the high country. His voice was full of dreams taking shape, plans that included her in every detail. I want to give you everything, Zelda. A home, security, love, family. Everything your father could not provide at the end and your mother would have wanted for you. You already have given me everything, she replied. You saw me when I was invisible. You helped when you had no obligation. You loved me when I felt unlovable. That is more than I ever dared hope for. They left San Diego 3 days after the wedding, the wagon loaded with supplies and gifts from Constance and her friends. Zelda hugged her aunt fiercely, promising to write often and visit when they could. You have found something rare and precious, Constance whispered in her ear. A good man who loves you truly. Hold onto that, nurture it, and never take it for granted. I will not, Aunt Constance. Thank you for giving me a place to land, even if I am leaving again so soon. You will always have a place here if you need it, but I think you have found your true home. Constance released her and turned to Kieran, fixing him with a stern look that was belied by the affection in her eyes. You take care of my niece, young man, or you will answer to me. I will protect her with my life, madam. You have my word. Kieran shook her hand formally, then surprised her by pulling her into a brief hug. Thank you for your trust and your blessing. It means more than I can say. The journey back across California and Arizona took 3 weeks, but it was vastly different from Zelda's trip west. She traveled with her husband instead of among strangers. They stopped when they wanted, made camp where they chose, and spent their evenings wrapped in each other's arms under the stars. The hardships of the trail were still present, the heat and dust and difficult terrain, but they faced them together, and that made all the difference. Kieran taught her to ride his paint horse, laughing gently when she bounced awkwardly in the saddle at first. She taught him songs her mother had sung, filling their camps with music in the evenings. They talked endlessly, sharing histories and hopes, discovering the 1,000 small details that made them who they were in Tucson. They stopped to resupply, and Kieran introduced her to several merchants he did business with. Word had apparently spread about the cowboy who had saved a stage from bandits, and people treated him with respect tinged with admiration. Zelda felt proud to stand beside him, to be introduced as his wife. They pushed north from Tucson through high desert country that Kieran knew intimately. He pointed out landmarks, shared stories of cattle drives and near disasters, made the landscape come alive with his history. Zelda began to understand the land through his eyes, seeing beauty in the harsh vistas, appreciating the resilience required to thrive in such country. Finally, after weeks of travel, they crested a ridge and Kieran pulled the wagon to a stop. There, he said simply, pointing to a valley spread below them. That is home. Zelda looked down at the cabin, nestled beside a creek lined with cottonwoods, corrals and outbuildings scattered nearby, cattle dotting the grassland in small groups. It was small and rough as Kieran had warned, but it was theirs, and it was beautiful in its simplicity. It is perfect, she breathed. Can we go down? I want to see everything. Kieran laughed and flicked the reins, sending the wagon down the slope toward their future. As they approached, men emerged from the barn and bunkhouse, calling greetings and gathering around as Kieran pulled up in front of the cabin. Boys, this is my wife, Zelda, Kieran announced, helping her down from the wagon. Zelda, this is Miguel, Carlos, Joseph, Samuel, and Thomas. They run this ranch when I am too foolish to stay here and do it myself." The men greeted her with a mix of curiosity and respect, clearly surprised their boss had returned married. Miguel, who seemed to be the foreman, stepped forward with a broad smile. "Welcome, Senora Xavier. The boss has needed a good woman to settle him down. We are very happy for you both." "Thank you, Miguel. I look forward to getting to know all of you." Zelda looked at the weathered faces before her, seeing good men who had kept Kieran's dreams alive while he was gone. "I hope you will be patient with me as I learn how things work here." "We will teach you anything you want to know," Joseph assured her. He was younger than the others, probably close to Zelda's age. "And if the boss gives you any trouble, you just let us know. We will set him straight." "I will keep that in mind," Zelda said, laughing at Kieran's mock outraged expression. They spent the rest of that day settling in. The cabin was indeed small, but clean and well built. One room served as kitchen and living space, with a stone fireplace and a good iron stove. The other room held a bed frame and little else, clearly waiting for a woman's touch to make it truly a bedroom. Kieran apologized for its bareness, but Zelda was already imagining curtains and rugs, personal touches that would transform the space. "We will make it beautiful," she assured him. "It just needs time and care, like most worthwhile things." That night, their first in their own home, they made love in their own bed with the sound of the creek outside and the vast New Mexico sky visible through the window. Afterward, Zelda lay in Kieran's arms and felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. This was what she had been searching for without knowing it. Not just shelter or security, but belonging. A place where she was wanted and needed, loved for exactly who she was. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "For what?" Kieran's voice was drowsy, satisfied. "For seeing me that day in Santa Fe, for caring enough to help a stranger, for loving me, for giving me this life." She pressed a kiss to his shoulder. "For everything." His arms tightened around her. "No, thank you. Thank you for accepting my help with grace, for being brave enough to love me back, for choosing this life with me. You are the best thing that has ever happened to me, Zelda Xavier." The seasons turned and life at the ranch settled into satisfying patterns. Zelda learned the rhythms of cattle ranching, understanding when the men rode out to check water sources or move herds to fresh grazing. She learned to cook for a ranch crew, feeding 6 hungry men 3 times a day and baking enough bread to keep them all satisfied. She kept the cabin clean and comfortable, adding touches that made it feel like home. Curtains sewn from fabric ordered from Santa Fe, rugs to warm the wood floor, shelves that Kieran built to hold the few books they owned and would gradually acquire more. She also learned that she was good at the business side of ranching. Kieran was talented with cattle and men, but paperwork exhausted him. Zelda took over the accounts, tracking expenses and income, planning purchases and sales. She discovered she had a head for figures and organization, skills her mother had taught her that found new purpose on the ranch. The neighboring Garcia family became fast friends. Rosa Garcia was close to Zelda's age, married with 3 young children, and she welcomed another woman nearby with joy that bordered on relief. Through Rosa, Zelda learned the customs and language of their Mexican neighbors, picking up Spanish from patient instruction and daily practice. She learned to make tortillas and tamales, traded recipes and household tips, and found in Rosa the sister she had never had. Winter came, fierce and beautiful, blanketing the high country in snow. The ranch work slowed but did not stop. Cattle still needed checking, water sources needed to be kept clear of ice, and supplies had to be carefully managed. Kieran and Zelda spent long evenings by the fire, reading aloud to each other, playing cards, simply talking and being together. It was during one of those long winter evenings that Zelda realized her monthly courses had not arrived. She said nothing at first, afraid to speak hope aloud and have it proven false. But when another month passed with no sign, she could not keep silent any longer. "Kieran," she said one night as they prepared for bed, "I think I might be with child." He froze in the act of pulling off his boots, his head snapping up to stare at her. "Are you certain?" "As certain as I can be without seeing a doctor. My courses have not come in 2 months, and I have been feeling strange in the mornings." Rosa said those were signs she always experienced. Zelda twisted her hands together, nervous about his reaction. They had not explicitly discussed children beyond vague future plans. Kieran crossed the room in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. When he pulled back, there were tears in his eyes. "A baby! We are going to have a baby! You are happy!" Relief flooded through her. "Happy does not begin to cover it." "Zelda, you have given me back everything I lost. A home, a family, a future. I love you so much." He kissed her deeply, then dropped to his knees and pressed his face against her still flat stomach. "Hello, little one. I am your father, and I promise I will do everything in my power to keep you and your mother safe and happy." Zelda ran her fingers through his dark hair, overwhelmed with emotion. This man, this good and decent man, had taken her desperation and transformed it into joy. Had seen her at her lowest point and chosen to love her. Had built a life with her that kept getting better with each passing day. The pregnancy progressed well, despite morning sickness that lasted into her 4th month. Rosa proved invaluable, advising Zelda on what to expect, what to eat, how to prepare for the birth. The ranch hands treated Zelda like precious cargo, insisting she not overwork herself, doing the heavy lifting and hard labor without being asked. Kieran was attentive to the point of being overbearing, worried about every small pain or discomfort. Zelda had to threaten him with sleeping in the barn before he would stop trying to confine her to bed rest. She was pregnant, not dying, and she had no intention of spending 6 months as an invalid. "Women have been having babies for thousands of years," she reminded him when his hovering became too much. "I will be fine. The baby will be fine. You need to trust me to know my own limits." "I know," he admitted. "But after losing my family the way I did, the thought of anything happening to you or our child—" He trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Zelda softened immediately, pulling him close. "Nothing is going to happen. I am strong and healthy, and we have Rosa and the doctor in town if anything goes wrong. But you cannot protect us from life, Kieran. You can only love us and trust that we will all get through whatever comes together." He nodded against her shoulder, and she felt the tension slowly drain from his body. Fear was natural, especially given his history. But they could not let fear rule their lives, or it would poison the joy they had built. Summer brought the baby, arriving during the hottest part of July in the middle of the night. Rosa came to help, and the doctor they had brought from town weeks before to be on hand delivered a healthy, screaming boy with dark hair and his father's gray eyes. "You have a son," the doctor announced, placing the cleaned and wrapped infant in Zelda's arms. 10 fingers, 10 toes, and lungs that work extremely well. Kieran stood frozen beside the bed, staring at his son with an expression of wonder so profound it made Zelda's eyes sting with fresh tears. "He is perfect," he whispered. "Absolutely perfect. You want to hold him?" Zelda shifted the baby toward Kieran, who took his son with shaking hands, cradling him against his chest like the precious miracle he was. "Hello, Tobias," Kieran murmured, having settled on the name weeks before. It had been his grandfather's name, a man Kieran remembered with love and respect. "I am your papa and this is your mama, and we are going to love you more than you can possibly imagine." Baby Tobias responded by waving a tiny fist and continuing to cry, which made everyone laugh. He was real and solid and healthy, and Zelda felt her heart expand to accommodate this new, overwhelming love. The years rolled past, full and rich. Tobias grew into a sturdy, curious boy who followed his father everywhere, learning the ranch from the time he could walk. 2 years after Tobias, a daughter arrived, Clara, with Zelda's dark blonde hair and sunny disposition. 3 years after Clara came another boy, Michael, who was quiet and thoughtful like his father. The ranch prospered. Kieran's reputation for honest dealing and quality cattle spread throughout the territory. They expanded the herd, added more land, built proper additions onto the cabin, until it was a sprawling ranch house with room for their growing family. Miguel became a full partner in the operation, his loyalty and skill rewarded with ownership stake. The other ranch hands became family of a sort, eating Sunday dinners with the Xaviers, helping raise the children, growing old together. Zelda wrote to Constance regularly, and her aunt visited twice over the years, delighting in her niece's happiness and her growing grandnieces and grandnephews. The Sunrise House remained a beacon in San Diego, and Constance eventually retired peacefully, leaving the business to a trusted manager and spending her final years surrounded by people who loved her. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Kieran took Zelda riding up to the ridge where they had first looked down on the ranch together. It was the same time of year, late summer. The valley spread below them in golden glory, their children visible playing near the house while ranch hands worked nearby cattle. "You remember that first day?" Kieran asked, his arm around Zelda's waist as they looked down at the life they had built. "When I brought you home, of course I remember. I was terrified and excited in equal measure, hoping I could make a life here but not sure if I was strong enough." She leaned into his warmth, comfortable in their long familiarity. "You have made me strong, though. This place, this life, our family. It has all made me who I am meant to be. You were always strong. I just gave you space to show it." Kieran turned her to face him, his storm-gray eyes as intense now as they had been that first day in Santa Fe. "I love you, Zelda Xavier. More now than even on our wedding day, though I would not have believed that possible then. You are my partner, my best friend, the mother of my children and the love of my life." "And you are mine," Zelda replied, tears streaming freely down her face. "You saved me in every way a person can be saved. You saw me when I was invisible, helped when you had no obligation, loved me when I felt unlovable. Everything good in my life flows from that moment when you chose kindness over indifference." "Then we saved each other," Kieran said softly. "Because you brought me back to life after years of just existing. You gave me family again, love again, hope again. We are even, you and I." They kissed there on the ridge, surrounded by the vast New Mexico sky, the land they had claimed and tamed together spreading below them. In the valley, their children played and called to each other, their laughter carrying on the breeze. Ranch hands worked the cattle that represented years of effort and success. Smoke rose from the house that had grown from a simple cabin to a true home, full of love and life and all the messy beauty of a family. When they finally rode back down, Tobias came running to meet them, his 9-year-old legs pumping as he raced across the grass. "Papa, Mama, Carlos said the creek caught 3 fish for dinner. Can we cook them on the fire outside?" "That sounds perfect, Toby," Kieran said, swinging his son up onto the horse in front of him. "Where are your sister and brother?" "Clara is helping Rosa make pies, and Michael is napping." "He is always napping." The older boy's tone suggested endless frustration with his younger brother's need for sleep. "You napped too when you were 4, Zelda reminded him, smiling at Tobias's skeptical expression. "Just wait. In a few years Michael will be running you ragged trying to keep up." They spent that evening as they had spent so many others, gathered around a fire outside the house, cooking fish and telling stories while the sun set in a blaze of orange and purple. The children eventually fell asleep against their parents, warm and full and secure in their place in the world. Ranch hands drifted to the bunkhouse, calling good nights. The valley settled into peaceful darkness, stars emerging overhead in their thousands. Kieran carried Michael to bed while Zelda got Clara settled. Then together they put Tobias down, the boy barely stirring as they tucked quilts around him. In their own room, they prepared for bed with the ease of long practice, movements synchronized by years of sharing space. "You ever wonder what your life would have been like if I had not been in that stage depot?" Kieran asked as they settled into bed, Zelda's head on his shoulder in their customary position. "Sometimes," Zelda admitted, "but not with regret, only gratitude. Everything hard I went through, every loss and struggle led me to that moment. To you. So I cannot regret any of it, because without those experiences, I would not have this life. I feel the same way about losing my family. The grief nearly destroyed me, but it drove me west to New Mexico, to building this ranch. And that put me in Santa Fe the exact day you needed help. Everything we lost brought us together." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "So I thank them, my parents and sister. I hope they know that their deaths, as awful as they were, eventually led to life again. To our children who carry their blood forward. To love that honors their memory by refusing to let grief have the final word." "They know," Zelda said softly. "I believe they watch over us, just as my parents do. All of them together, happy that we found each other and built something beautiful from the ashes of our losses." They fell asleep like that, wrapped together, the house quiet around them except for the occasional sound of a child shifting in sleep or the wind moving through the cottonwoods by the creek. Outside, the land stretched away in all directions. Their land, their home, their legacy. Cattle grazed under stars that had witnessed countless human dramas and would witness countless more. The creek murmured its eternal song, life giving water in a dry country, the sound that had drawn Kieran to this place and helped him build his dream. In the years that followed, the children grew into fine adults. Tobias took over the ranch operations, marrying a sweet woman from town and filling the house with a new generation of children. Clara became a teacher, following a path her mother had not been able to take, educating children throughout the territory. Michael studied law in Santa Fe, returning to practice in the nearest town and helping ranchers and farmers navigate the increasingly complex legal landscape of the changing West. Kieran and Zelda aged gracefully, their love deepening with each passing year rather than fading as some marriages did. They were partners in every sense, making decisions together, supporting each other through challenges, celebrating victories as a team. The ranch remained prosperous, their reputation for quality and honesty ensuring steady business even as cattle markets fluctuated. On their 30th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered at the ranch. Children, grandchildren, old friends and neighbors, all coming together to celebrate two people who had built something lasting from a moment of desperate need and unexpected kindness. Tables groaned under the weight of food. Music and laughter filled the air. Stories were told and retold, the legend of how Zelda and Kieran met growing with each telling, becoming family mythology. Zelda stood on the porch of the ranch house she had helped build and expand, watching her grandchildren play in the yard where her own children had played. She wore the same cream-colored dress from her wedding, carefully preserved all these years, altered to accommodate a body that had borne 3 children and 62 years of life. Around her neck hung her mother's locket, never removed, a constant reminder of where she had come from. Kieran joined her, sliding an arm around her still slim waist. His hair was gray now, his face lined by decades of sun and wind, but his eyes were the same storm gray that had captured her attention that first day. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Everything. The day we met. The stage journey, our wedding, building this ranch, our children growing up, all of it." She leaned into him, drawing strength and comfort from his solid presence. "And how none of it would exist if you had not been kind to a desperate stranger. If you had walked past without noticing or chosen to ignore what you saw. I could never have ignored you. You were impossible to ignore, standing there trying to be brave while your heart was breaking." He pressed a kiss to her temple, gentle and reverent. "Saving you saved me, Zelda. I hope you understand that. You were not the only one who needed rescue that day. I know. And that is why it has worked, why we have worked. We gave each other exactly what we needed when we needed it most." She turned in his arms to face him directly. "I love you, Kieran Xavier. Today and every day for the rest of our lives. And I love you, Zelda Xavier, my wife, my partner, my heart." He kissed her softly, mindful of their audience but unable to resist. "Thank you for choosing me, for taking a chance on a serious cowboy who could not stop staring at you in a stage depot." "Thank you for paying my fare," Zelda replied, laughing through happy tears. "Best investment you ever made, without question," Kieran agreed, "without a single doubt. Everything good in my life traces back to that moment. You are the thread that stitches my whole life together, making sense of all that came before and giving meaning to all that came after." They rejoined the party, moving among family and friends, accepting congratulations and well wishes, soaking in the love that surrounded them. As the sun set in its familiar, spectacular display, painting the New Mexico sky in shades of fire, the whole gathering gathered for a photograph. Multiple generations arranged on and around the porch of the ranch house. Zelda stood in the center with Kieran beside her, their children and grandchildren arrayed around them like a living testament to the power of love and second chances. The photographer counted down, everyone held still, and for one perfect moment they were frozen in time. Proof that desperate beginnings could lead to beautiful endings. Evidence that kindness given to strangers could transform lives and create legacies. That photograph would hang in the ranch house for generations, shown to great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren as the story was told and retold. How great-grandmother Zelda had been willing to trade her last possession for passage west. How great-grandfather Kieran had seen and paid her fare instead. How one moment of mercy had blossomed into a love story that spanned decades and touched countless lives. Zelda and Kieran lived into their 80s, dying within months of each other, neither able to face life without the other. They were buried side by side on the ridge where Kieran had proposed and where they had stood on their 10th anniversary, looking down at the life they had built together. The headstones were simple but elegant, bearing their names and dates and one phrase that captured their entire story. She needed help, he gave it, and love transformed them both. The ranch continued to thrive under Tobias's management, and eventually his own children's stewardship. The Xavier name became synonymous with integrity and quality throughout New Mexico and beyond. But more than the business success, the family carried forward the values Zelda and Kieran had lived: kindness to strangers, generosity without expectation of return, recognition that everyone carries burdens, and sometimes all they need is someone to see them and choose to help. The story of their meeting, romance, and life together was told at family gatherings for generations, taking on the quality of legend while remaining rooted in truth. It reminded each new generation that love could be found in the most unexpected places, that desperation could transform into joy, and that the choice to be kind to a stranger might change not just their life, but your own in ways you could never imagine. The locket Zelda had been willing to trade for passage west became a family heirloom, passed down through the generations to the oldest daughter in each line. With it came the story of its near loss and miraculous preservation, a reminder that some things are worth more than money, that memory and history and connection to those who came before are precious beyond measure. And sometimes, late at night when the wind moved through the cottonwoods by the creek, people claimed they could hear laughter echoing across the valley, the sound of two people who had found each other against all odds and built a love that time and death could not diminish. The land remembered them, held their story in its soil and stone, and would continue to whisper their tale to anyone who stopped to listen. Because some love stories are bigger than the two people who lived them. Some love stories become lessons, inspirations, proof that good things can grow from desperate situations, that strangers can become soulmates, that paying someone's fare west might earn you a lifetime of joy. Zelda and Kieran's story was one of those, a testament to the power of seeing another person's need and choosing, simply and completely, to help.